Real quick before we get started, I want to tell you about the Build Something Weekly newsletter. It is weekly, it is free, and you will get tips, tricks, and tools delivered directly to your mailbox. I will recap the current week's episode and all of the takeaways. I'll give you a top story, content I wrote, and then some recommendation that I've been using that I think you should check out. So it is free. It is weekly. It's over at howibuilt.it/subscribe. Go ahead and sign up over at howibuilt.it/subscribe. Hey, everybody, and welcome to episode 213 of How I Built It, the podcast that asks, how did you build that? Our sponsors today are Textexpander, Restrict Content Pro, and MindSize. You'll hear all about them later in the show. But I am excited to bring on Hazel Quimpo and Zach Tirell, the marketing principal and general manager, respectively, over at the events calendar. Full disclosure before we get going here, the events calendar was recently acquired by Liquid Web, who also owns Restrict Content Pro by owning iThemes. So I know that was a little bit confusing. It's all under the same umbrella. I just wanted to make that super clear in the beginning. But Zach has been on the show before, and Hazel and I have known each other for a little while. I'm really excited because we are going to talk about a pivot that the team over at the events calendar made to add virtual events add-on to their plugin. So before we get into all that, why don't I welcome our guests here. Hazel, how are you doing today?
Doing fantastic. It's early over here, but I'm an early riser, so it's all good.
It is. When you mentioned that you were from California, I was like, man, it is early right there. No, I've been up since like 5 because I have a kid. I have 2 kids. And Zach, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having us, Joe.
Oh, thanks for being on the show. Super excited. Zach, where are you also out on the West Coast?
I'm not. I'm in the Northeast. I'm up here in New Hampshire.
Oh, okay. Very nice. Very nice. So just a few hours drive down 95 to get to Philadelphia, which is where I'm located.
Yeah.
Multiple hours.
Not so bad.
Yeah. I say a few hours.
8, maybe?
Yeah, I think it's 8. Yeah.
It's okay. It's still a day trip.
Yeah, exactly. Just, rock and roll. Absolutely. That's I was talking to somebody from Britain, and they said that 100 years of their history is like a 1 hour or 2 hour drive to us, as in it doesn't seem like that much, right? Like 100 years is like half of the United States history. Yeah. But to them, like if I say I'm driving 2 hours, they're like, that is an insane amount of time to drive. And I'm like, that's
I'm constantly reminded, like, Europeans don't realize like how giant America is. It's like huge.
Yep. It takes like 6 hours for me to get to Pittsburgh from Philadelphia. So like, it's like, I didn't even realize.
I'll drive 6 hours and I'm still in California.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that was your geography lesson for the day. Listeners, thanks for sticking with us through that. I'm really excited to talk to you about this because the events calendar, fantastic WordPress plugin that focused very much on live events for a long time. And then it seems like you shrewdly realized in the wake of COVID that a virtual events add-on would be a good thing to have. And so the first thing I want to talk about is how you pivoted, right? Because you were a relatively small team when you did this, or did you have, right? Like you didn't have like a fleet of developers, or?
I don't know. Are we considered a small team or no? We're probably middle of the road when it comes to that sort of thing.
We may be fairly big in like the independent WordPress plugin space. We're no Automatic or anything like that, but we've got kind of a mixed headcount of contractors and full-time employees. So often our headcount number is pretty high, but our teams is just over 50 human beings.
Wow. I didn't realize that. That's like maybe something that I, as the host, should have known going into this episode. But I would actually, I would say that that's a relatively big team, which makes the pivot even more interesting, right? So how did the idea come about? And then how did you mitigate that sort of pivot?
This is fun to talk about, like in retrospect. We haven't really thought about it in depth since this all happened. I remember January, February, March of 2020 was like when all this was happening. January and February, last year, actually, we're a fully remote team. We were planning on doing our remote trip. Actually, we were going to go to Italy last year. It was going to be the whole thing. And in February, actually in March even, we were still like, yeah, we'll probably go to Italy. And then finally it was like, yeah, we're not going there. And also, what are we going to do about events? Because now nobody's going to do events.
Yeah.
So we did quickly. We actually, Zach and everybody in leadership empowered basically everybody on the team to be like, okay, well, what are your ideas that's going to help our customers actually still be able to succeed with all these new limitations? So people actually started whipping up like all these extensions. There was all sorts of them. Do you remember what some of them were, Zach? There was tons of little extensions to do all sorts of things.
Yeah, it was like every day, we kind of like took the shackles off in terms of the roadmap. We were just like, the world's different. Everybody just like go do something interesting today because we don't know. I think we were working on an update to our mobile app that would have helped like event check-ins in person. We're like, no, this doesn't make any sense. Stop working on that right now. I think we were in the final plans of starting up seating charts again. It's like none of this makes any sense. So we really kind of unshackled everybody and just go work on some stuff. So right out of the gate was the Google released updated like JSON LD to support virtual events. And so somebody like the next day put out an extension that was like, oh, now we have this support for the events calendar.
Wow.
And it was that kind of thing. I think for maybe 3 weeks or so there, every day I would come in and one of our devs had done some weird, interesting thing that they wanted to share that was very customer specific, very in the moment, trying to address the kind of global anxiety we all were in the middle of.
Wow, Oh, go ahead, Hazel. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say it was team-wide too, because it wasn't just developers. Like even on content side, people were writing all sorts of tips and things what you should do. Not even just like my content team. It was everybody like throwing in different ways of like either a hack, workaround to make a thing happen, or just in general best practice. Like we're all used to virtual events because we've been, going to them daily for the past, I don't know, is it 20 years now? But at the time, people were scrambling. They didn't know what to do. And virtual events was always something we had kind of hovered around. Customers wanted it, but it wasn't super high demand. So it wasn't on our immediate roadmap at the time. But yeah, so we started doing all these extensions and we ended up again with the challenge of extensions are free. We have a free extension library that anybody on our team can make one. And we go through a little process, but they're not like supported by our full support team, but they're fun. They're little things. They could be a fun little thing or like, oh, do you want to print your tickets as PDFs or various little things that aren't in the product core. Yeah. The challenge we are experiencing is that we have a pretty large customer base, especially on our free product, and they just don't know about extensions as much as I no shortage of any channel. I was trying to let everybody know about extensions, and like we would still get these emails of like, well, how do we do virtual events? I'm like, well, we have all of this. So we came there. The next part of it was a weird part because we're like, well, look, we want people to be able to do this. There's also a business opportunity, but you don't want to seem predatory. So it's like all of these things that came into balance, and it really worked out. We're like, well, let's put some of these extensions along with some other stuff we've been working internally and kind of roll them into this virtual events add-on. So now people realize, well, this is a thing we have. And just naming it really just made the success of it, made it so that, oh, we understand that they support virtual events. And we still offer the free extensions if you want to piece it together that way too.
This episode is brought to you by Restrict Content Pro. If you need a fast, easy way to set up a membership site for yourself or your clients, look no further than the Restrict Content Pro WordPress plugin. Easily create premium content for members using your favorite payment gateway, manage members, send member-only emails, and more. You can create any number of subscription packages, including free levels and free trials. But that's not all. Their extensive add-ons library allows you to do even more, like drip out content, connect with any number of CRMs and newsletter tools, including ConvertKit and MailChimp, and integrate with other WordPress plugins like bbPress. Since the Build Something Club rolled out earlier this year, you can bet it's using Restrict Content Pro, and I have used all of the things mentioned here in this ad read. I have created free levels. I've created coupons. I use ConvertKit, and I'm using it with bbPress for the forums. I'm a big fan of the team, and I know they do fantastic work. The plugin has worked extremely well for me, and I was able to get memberships up and running very quickly. Right now, they are offering a rare discount for How I Built It listeners only. 20% off your purchase when you use RCP How I Built It at checkout. That's RCP How I Built It, all one word. If you want to learn more about Restrict Content Pro and start making money with your own membership site, head on over to howibuilt.it/RCP. That's howibuilt.it/RCP. Thanks to Restrict Content Pro for supporting the show. And now let's get back to it. It sounds like you, for a number of weeks there, just made it like 20% time, but like the whole time, right? Like Google, for those who don't know, right? Google, I don't know if they still do this actually, but for many years.
I don't know if they do either.
I mean, like,
I think the executives get to do it.
Yeah, right. For a long time, right, they would allow employees to use 20% of their time to just work on whatever, pet projects and cool things like that. And lots of cool projects came out of that, like Google Reader, rest in peace. Google Wave, rest in peace. Google, the social okra thing, rest in peace.
So they've got a good track record.
Yeah, they have a really nice, there's like a great website that's called like Google Graveyard or something like that. But it sounds like you just kind of said like, go crazy. Let's just come up with like, there are no bad ideas in brainstorming, which the coder in me is like singing, right? Because there are some days where I'm like, I wish I could just kind of like knock off for the day and code some weird thing. But also I have like a ton of content and client work I need to do. And like limited time, right? Because I'm watching my kids half of the week. But that sounds amazing. And then Hazel, it sounds like you alluded to this. You had all of these extensions and then you rolled it into a virtual events add-on. So, when you said you threw out your roadmap, how long did it take between kind of like the code everything, let's see what ideas are good. How long between that and the virtual events add-on? How much time passed? Approximately.
Till the release, or until we decided we're gonna turn this into a thing?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So how about you decide to turn it into a thing? Because I suspect when you decided to turn it into a thing, I suspect your roadmap changed a little bit there, and you actually started to have like a clearer one.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. So I clearly remember as a lot of these ideas were coming out, it was a little cowboy, right? Mm-hmm. We weren't using all of our processes. We weren't including a lot of people in the conversation about, we're going to put a virtual event indicator in list view. What's that going to look like? And I'll admit, our design team started to get some anxiety around that. They were like, this isn't us. We just launched these brand new views that are beautiful and very well designed, and you're just sticking a thing right here. You guys can't do that. What's happening? So that was one of the big influences, I think, to us saying, okay, it's fun to have these in the free extension, but we probably also want to put some polish on this to make it a real thing. And then, I don't know, it was probably late one night or early one morning, because that's when Hazel has her best ideas. She DM'd me and said, this needs to be a thing. We need to package this up and make it a product. And, the experiments are fun, but we need to make it a thing.
Gotcha.
That was probably 3 weeks in, probably late
yeah,
March,
we were probably
April.
we were just really sending out as much content as we could about these extensions, about the content we had written. We gave everybody like the playbook of how to do virtual events, and we were still getting inundated of people. It was scrambling. People were afraid of their livelihoods at the time. And frankly, a lot of events people still are.
Yeah. And admittedly, we were too, right?
Yeah,
our whole business is events. We had no idea what was going to happen to our revenue.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally understandable. My brother, Phil, works for an art gallery, and his main job was to plan 2 huge events that were like the biggest fundraisers for this art gallery. And I think with grants, they were able to keep him until October, but eventually he got furloughed because events weren't working. And I was like, what about virtual events? And he said, we thought about that. But yeah, it's really interesting. So this pivot is incredible because it feels like you were able to help a lot of people out and empower them and maybe even give them some ideas for how they can stay afloat in a time where people weren't going places.
Yeah, and we were able to roll it out with some other opportunities that had popped up at the time, which we have a email communication tool for all of our events called Promoter. We gave Promoter away free for 6 months. Anybody could use it because that was like a big hang up people were having is like, well, I need to let folks know if my event is canceled or not canceled, or there was so much uncertainty before everybody knew that, well, everything's canceled.
Yeah.
But at the time there was like, is it canceled? Is it not? So we gave everybody Promoter for free for a good chunk of the year last year.
That's fantastic. And so I want to circle back to that, right? Because you mentioned that you have a lot of free customers as well. Your extensions are free. But I do want to talk about once you've decided to package this up. I want to ask the title question, right? How did you build it? How did you define the roadmap? What did the design team contribute, right, to make sure that everything was on the up and up? So what did the rollout look like?
So for me, the funnest part of virtual events was so many times we have our roadmap because we have 9, 10 products. No, their answer 9 or 10 products. We have several products which all have their respective roadmaps essentially. So when you're doing things, you're kind of hopping between different ones. Obviously, they each have their dedicated team, but if you're in one that kind of floats between like marketing, like I'm like, oh, what are you guys doing over here? What's happening here? This was really cool. Everybody buckled down on just this one thing. And we actually did a pattern where we had meetings, I think almost daily at one point, going through the whole Moscow list, which I don't know what it stands for. What's that? Like a project management. I'm not a project manager. It's like a must have. Could you do whatever?
Nice. I've never heard that before. So I'll link in the show notes to something for that.
Yeah, it's really, I can share a template with you too. Susan, who runs the ship for all of this stuff, was amazing, like on getting everybody on board and really making sure that everybody understood what was next. And the hardest part was what is priority? Because this is new. Like when we're looking at something for 10 years, as we had for the events calendar, it was pretty, I wouldn't say easy to figure out priority. It's always a challenge, but it was like, we had our general big buckets. And now it's like, well, this is a whole new thing. And what is important that we can actually build? So Zach, I don't know if you remember like some of the stuff that was on our list. There's some stuff that still hasn't made it, obviously.
Yeah, we obviously latched onto Zoom right away. Mm-hmm. It was clear that that's where everybody was going. Still sort of surprises me to some extent. There's so many different video platforms, but Zoom won in this big disruption. Yep. So we immediately started building a Zoom integration. That was one of the first extensions we put out too. And so that became, I think, the cornerstone feature of the virtual events product. We needed it to be really easy for someone to create a Zoom meeting from within WordPress, from within their event creation interface. Obviously, updates to the views so that we could show, virtual events. I think embedded some controls around embedded video, which seems like, well, why all of a sudden are we doing controls around embedded video of like, if someone's logged in, do they have a ticket? Can they view this? It was like, oh yeah, because that's what this is all of a sudden.
Right.
Low priority feature that suddenly became high priority.
That's super interesting, right? Because I've been thinking a lot about that for like my members only content, right? Like I want to have like office hours or like a sign up only webinar or something like that. And I'm like, I could pay like some exorbitant amount for webinar software, but like I don't use it enough to justify that cost. So I'm like, I'll just put a WordPress page and password protect it. But it sounds like you're solving that exact problem, and maybe something that we could talk about in the members only episode. Along with joining the Liquid Web team is they also own Restrict Content Pro, sponsor of this episode, and I'm sure there's probably some synergy there that maybe we can discuss.
Yes.
I mean, this is fantastic, right? I feel like you really understood the space. And is that because you've been in it for a long time, or did you get a lot of feedback from customers, or some combination of both?
So I was in a position where I could act as like a prototype customer because I am. Mm-hmm. I've been a customer from the events calendar from before I worked for the events calendar. I've always run various events, but most recently I run a parenting community here in Long Beach. And we do tons of events and all kinds of stuff. And I was also pivoting to virtual. Mm-hmm. And I was like, hey guys, can I do this with like not taking 15 steps? Can it just take 2 steps? Because it was a lot of steps to get virtual events going at first. You're having to email everybody manually, go to your 4 platforms. You're doing Zoom here, something else with the events calendar, something else with, your email system. And that was a large part of what initially did. However, we dove right in and did a ton of user interviews too, because I'm certainly not the be all end all of a event planner's experience. So we dove in and did a few dozen user interviews, and that really helped guide us.
That's great. And what did you use for the user interviews? Because this is something that's come up on the show a lot. I certainly don't do it enough for my courses or my products. I feel like it's probably something that a lot of listeners want to do more of. So is there anything that you use to make those easier for you, or?
I have a very specific theory on user interviews is that everybody's very afraid to talk to their customers. It's not that hard. Yeah. Like you just like people like overthink it and they're like, what are we going to, I'm like, I don't know, find like a customer who opened a support ticket recently and then email them, ask if they want to talk more. Like it's not, I don't do a very scientific method on this. Perhaps I should, but it seems to serve us pretty decently.
I mean, Hazel's being kind of humble there. Her user interviews are so good. And she's right that her process is pretty loose, but every time I listen to one of, because she records them, what's the program you use that does the transcription?
Oh yeah, we use otter.ai to transcribe, which is great because then you can go 2x listening to it in the background while you're doing something or whatever.
Nice. Yeah, and then I listen to those anytime. Sometimes she tells me like, whatever, this one was kind of boring. But a lot of the time when she says, this one's worth listening to, I'll just sit there, and they're so full of ideas and things that we can do that just would make the product better. And sometimes not even big things. It's just little like, oh, we couldn't even see that. We've been in the product so long. Yeah. I love Hazel's user interviews. They're so good, and I want to do more of them. But we definitely did a bunch on this project.
That's the thing. My only method is like, we should do more of them. And one of the channels I want to do more of them, this is less related to this project specifically, but ongoing, that I've been tossing around this idea of like, oh, if someone on the support team has a good interaction, or just maybe any kind of interaction where the person's kind of pushing more about ideas, well, I should just give them my Calendly link so they can, schedule an interview, because might as well, if they're already interested in talking, let's just keep that pipeline going.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, I think you make a really good point, right? People are afraid to talk to their customers because what if I hear something bad, right? But like
you probably will.
You probably will, right? No one's perfect, and no one could see what everybody is thinking about your product, right? So I love it. You just reach out, use otter.ai. Is that good? I've heard a lot of automated transcription services, but this one keeps coming up a lot. It's
the only good one I've seen. It still gets some weirdness, but it's like head and shoulders above any other one I've tried. And it's really cheap. It's like $100 a year or something. It's really cheap.
Oh, relatively. Wow. Cool. Yeah. I've been using like the Rev automation, and that's like okay. And it's also really cheap. Yeah. But
I've never used that one.
It's okay. I mean, I don't pay for their like person transcription because that's really expensive, and my transcriber is amazing. Thank you, Evelyn. So she's great. But when I need something like quick and dirty, like the automated one is good. But exactly. we're getting off topic here, but I think that was really helpful. Something you've mentioned now a couple of times is the importance of like the email lists. And we were talking in the pre-show about how you're using Freemius. And for those of you who don't know, I interviewed Vova Feldman in an episode a couple years ago. I'll link that in the show notes. But Freemius is essentially a way for you to sell. Is it specifically WordPress plugins? I was going to say digital products, but it's very specific to WordPress plugins.
it's specific to WordPress plugins. Go listen to your old Vova episode for sure. But we don't use the full Freemius platform.
Right.
We use one half of it. So Freemius can be your sales and distribution of your plugin, but it also comes with double opt-in plus analytics on your customers, and that's the piece that we use. So when anybody installs either our free products, the events calendar or event tickets, then they get prompted. Do you want to share your information with the events calendar, and then we're able to communicate with them and build out our list.
This episode is brought to you by Textexpander. With Textexpander, you can save time by converting any text you type into keyboard shortcuts called snippets. Say goodbye to repetitive text entry, spelling and message errors, and trying to remember the right thing to say. With Textexpander, you can say the right thing in just a few keystrokes. Better than copy and paste, better than scripts and templates, Textexpander snippets allow you to maximize your time by getting rid of the repetitive things you type while still customizing and personalizing your messages. Textexpander can be used in any platform, any app, anywhere you type. Take back your time and increase your productivity in the new year. And let me just say that snippets is not all it does. With advanced snippets, you can create fill-ins, pop-up fields, and much more. You can even use JavaScript or AppleScript. I can type out full instructions for my podcast editor, hi Joel, in just a few keystrokes. Another one of my favorite and most used snippets is PPT. This will take whatever text I have on my keyboard and convert it to plain text, so I'm no longer fighting formatting. Plus, if you have employees or contractors, you can use Textexpander to manage and share snippets with them, so you all get it right every time. I've recently started sharing Textexpander snippets with my virtual assistant. This year, How I Built It is focusing on being productive while working from home. Textexpander is the perfect tool for that. Plus, they're providing resources and blog posts to help you make the most of their tool and be productive. Textexpander is available on macOS, Windows, Chrome, iPhone, and iPad. If you've been curious about trying Textexpander or simple automation in general, now is the time. Listeners can get 20% off their first year. Just visit textexpander.com/podcast and let them know that I sent you. So the way the process works, right, is somebody installs your plugin, they get prompted and say, hey, do you want to share info with us? And then you ask them for their email address there. Or is that like a secondary thing?
It asks there, and then there's a double opt-in after of
Gotcha.
like, oh, do you actually want to receive news from us?
Cool. So they really, they really want to, right?
Right. We try to stay all on the up and up with it.
100%. Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, there's certainly people who do that, and then they're like, "What? Why are you emailing me?" Well,
yeah,
you told us that it was okay. So that that's email marketing.
Right.
I think that this has always been a big gap in the WordPress plugin ecosystem that Vova's filling really nicely. It remains kind of confusing to me why WordPress as a parent brand doesn't have a lot of tools to support people like us. And I know that there's some dangerous waters around open source and all of this, but I don't know. What Automatic at this point sells a lot of plugins. It's not the old days of everything being totally free.
Yeah. I have a theory, and I don't want to get all bummer, but when I interviewed Becca over at Jilt, she said something that surprised me, which was if you sell plugins through the WooCommerce through WooCommerce.com, you don't get any customer information. You don't get to see those email addresses or whatever. So I suspect there's probably some purposeful vendor lock in there that Vova, Freemius, frankly, probably doesn't care about, right? Because you are the customer. Your customers are not their customers.
Yep, exactly.
But you also raise a good point.
It has gone.
Yeah. Go ahead, Hazel.
I was just going to say it has been a really nice channel for us, the free to paid. And not free to pay just from revenue, but also stuff like vital updates and stuff. Before, we were trying to hound people to join the mailing list because you want to find out if like something is a vital update you need or if something's broken. I mean, I'm not going to say we're not wanting to sell them stuff. Of course we do, sure. But there are in tandem, like there's actual vital updates that we just didn't have a channel before. And this has really opened that up and been really helpful.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I mean, you made the point that I was just going to make is you said that this has been a really great way for you to do something else I don't think a lot of small business owners focus too much on, which is building their email list at all. I started entirely too late on building my list, and it's been a great asset for me. So I think just, first of all, until you mentioned it, I didn't know that Freemius offered this other part of their platform. So those of you who are building plugins but don't necessarily use Freemius for distribution, you can still get analytics and build your email list, which is like
Boba's going to hate us now. I'm like,
he might like us. He might be struggling to sell that part of his product. I don't know. Yeah. Honestly, his pricing's really good on that part of the product too.
Awesome.
If you're using him for distribution, as soon as you hit a point where if you've got a big audience, it gets very expensive to be on Freemius.
Yeah.
And I'm sure for him, it's expensive to support. So it's fair, right?
Right.
Not predatory, but I could see where a bigger plugin shop may not look at Freemius because they're afraid of the distribution piece. But the analytics is great, and we really love it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So what do you use for the distribution channel? Did you build your own, or are you using like EDD? You built your own?
There was an old plugin, I don't know, 10 years ago, called PUE, Plugin Updater Engine, and we forked that very early on. I think we forked it. It probably disappeared 5 minutes after we forked it. I haven't ever heard of anyone else using it. But we've just been building on that as kind of our internal distribution for many, many years now.
Awesome. Man, this has been such a great conversation. As we kind of wrap up here, I do want to ask for tips for the listeners. And I think probably around your plugin, you've been really looking at virtual events. I know I aspire to host a virtual event sometime in the near future when my schedule is a little bit more flexible. If somebody wants to start a virtual event, are there any tips that you have for them besides get the events calendar and the virtual add-on? Because I was just looking at it, and for sure I will be adding that to my lineup.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of my tips are less related to the software. Of course, like that makes your life easier.
Sure.
But virtual events, they get so much flack because so many people are not putting effort into them, frankly. Like they're just like, come to my virtual event. And it's like, I don't know. I can't even think of a good example, but they're not doing a good job. I know I've been to several where they're not doing a good job.
Promoting I've been the speaker at several events. WordFest just happened as we record this, and the speaker team, really great job of communicating there. I think they did a fantastic job. I knew exactly what I needed to do and when I needed to do it and where I needed to be, and they did a really nice job there. But you're right. Some are just like, it's at this time, record or don't. Can you be there? Like, it's just.
Well, I think what it is to me, like an event has give and take from the presenter and the audience, whether it's a concert or whatever. There has to be give and take, and so many virtual events are just going one way. There's several ways to unlock that, but basically, it's like I used to say, like we live in like an age of events. Anybody can go through an event, but it's really become more now community. You can't have a successful virtual event without being a good community manager. Mm-hmm. You have to actively be out there, getting people involved, making them interested, so you have that give and take.
Yeah,
it does have to be more than just a webinar.
This episode is brought to you by MindSize. Look, it's super important for stores to have an online presence these days. If customers can't buy online, they might not buy at all. And while doing e-commerce fast has gotten easier, doing e-commerce right still has its considerable challenges. That's where MindSize comes in. They are a full-service digital agency that focuses on WordPress and WooCommerce development. But that's not all. They work with Shopify, BigCommerce, and more. And they'll work with you to create the perfect strategy and website for your business. Already have an e-commerce site and want to make sure it's up and running in tip-top shape? Their flat rate site audit is exactly what you need. Over the course of 2 weeks, they'll dive into every aspect of your site and deliver a prioritized list of actionable recommendations to make your site even better. That means more sales and engagement for you and your store. Or if you're a freelancer or agency who feels in over your head with an e-commerce build, their agency support plan is built specifically for you. There were a few times in my career where I really could have used that. They'll take a high-stress situation and help you relax while still delivering for your client. So check out MindSize over at mindsize.com today. They will help you make more money, whether you need an e-commerce store, whether you need to improve your current e-commerce store, or if you build e-commerce stores for others. That's mindsize.com, MindSize.com. Thanks so much to MindSize for supporting the show. There are a lot of things missing from virtual events that happen in in-person events, right? And one is the networking aspect. How do you mitigate that? I think WordPress or WordCamp sponsors have done a pretty good job. Like Yoast, I know, and GoDaddy Pro have both did interesting things to get people to their virtual booth, right? And so
yeah, I've seen that. WP Bucks is done a pretty cool job lately too of some of their stuff they've been doing.
Yeah. So so I think maybe the main takeaway, right, is if you're going to have a virtual event, don't just let it be a fly by night thing, right? Actually think about it and put effort into it and just be like, oh, I have Zoom. I'll have a virtual event.
Yeah, I mean, I think the takeaway is just make sure you're really understanding and thinking about the difference between event and content. Mm-hmm. A webinar certainly could be both, but typically it's a lot of times content, right? But the event is what's live, what's actually making people feel that sort of, that feeling when you go to an event that you have connection with the community.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. Just as a little bit of a tangent here, I've been thinking about doing like an Evergreen Webinar, right? Because I'm trying to move my own courses, and I'm just like, how do I make it evergreen? The virtue of an Evergreen Webinar is that I'm not actually there, right? Because and that's got to be super clear. But what if people have questions, and am I better off just doing X, Y, or Z? So I think I'm going to test the waters by like doing a YouTube premiere where
that's a good idea.
am there for that. Yeah, shout out to Aaron Flynn for giving me that idea. I'll actually be there for the premiere answering questions in the chat. And then if they want the super special thing, there'll be a link to a form, right, where they can get super special thing. So, but yeah, it's taking a lot of innovating, and it sounds like you all have done a really good job of pivoting and doing that, and helping people make better events in a medium that not a lot of people are familiar with too.
Yeah.
So awesome. Well, I want to end this conversation with asking you my favorite question. You can give a combined one or two different ones if you like, but it is, do you have any trade secrets for us?
Trade secrets.
Zach,
I'll let you go first.
I want to get a bell for when people say trade secrets.
I know, right? They probably do to buy time.
Most of my career has been more of a developer, but I'll give you a management trade secret, which is to just hire people that are smarter than you. We wouldn't have done any of this if we didn't have our team coming up with weird ideas, Hazel pushing, designers pushing. Virtual events is not the sort of product that's spun out of one person's brain. It's spun out of the team looking at all these different opportunities, writing great content, talking to customers. I don't know. It's a lot of smart people doing good work.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And if I had a trade secret, I would boil it down to what I said earlier. I see so many people just not being afraid to do a thing wrong. And there's such a short memory of anything these days. Just go do something. Who cares if it's wrong? Nobody's going to remember it tomorrow anyway.
Yeah, I love that. The your harshest critic will always be you, right, in that situation. Yep. But if you let me tell you, I eat my words a lot. I'll tweet something that's wrong, but I'll go back and I'll be like, hey, I was wrong about this or whatever.
Exactly. And it takes that kind of openness, and I think it opens a lot of doors, that willingness to be like, I'm not sure about this, but here's the thing.
Yeah, for sure. I always tell people that I would much rather be corrected than going on thinking I was wrong, than thinking something is wrong.
That you couldn't do it.
Yeah, like I would just I'd much rather be actually right than think I was right, I guess is the way to put that.
And the way you can find that out is by putting it out there.
Yeah, exactly. I have strong opinions that can also be changed. Awesome. Well, Hazel, Zach, this has been fantastic. If people want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
We're on the eventscalendar.com. We're pretty active on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all the places. But yeah, the eventscalendar.com is where we are.
All right. I will link to that and more in the show notes over at howibuilt.it/213. In the members only show, we are going to talk synergy with Restrict Content Pro, possibly acquisitions and more. If you're not part of the club, you can sign up over at buildsomething.club. It's just $5 a month for lots of cool content and interesting things. So thanks for listening. Thanks so much to our sponsors, MindSize, Restrict Content Pro, and Textexpander. And Hazel and Zach, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe. This was great.
Always fun.
And until next time, get out there and build something.